It goes.
Right guess to me, I don't look at
So am I.
Oh, yeah.
No, but it's not,
They're telling us that they had A, B, and C, and some people are here and here,
yeah.
and we're discussing these during the flight.
Yeah.
I'm one of the victims here. I'm not going to be telling anybody.
Right.
Thank you.
I think that's still thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's on your.
Because the water.
When I get in. I didn't hear.
All right, good, keep going here.
He said, you can have it. Huh?
I didn't do it.
No, you did. But I didn't look. He said that the one that I passed may not be the current issue. You know what?
I do a little bit. I said something to you. She said,
Yeah, but they changed everything. They changed them on an hourly basis. Oh, can we get the air turned on in here?
it's sort of mine.
Is the air on in here? It's awful warm. And I have a problem with this thing anyway.
Hello, Lisa.
I've had it in my toilet. Yeah. It is for me. I appreciate it very much.
Great, we can take the whole.
Yeah.
What?
I'm cold.
Well, trade places with me then. I,
All right, it's time to get going here.
Email that.
Okay, before we get started, I'm going to emphasize again, everybody talk slow and into your mic. Move your mic up a little bit. Yeah. All right, we're going to start our committee meetings, and first up is City Properties, Parks and Recreation, and Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Call to order City Properties, Parks and Recreation. It's September 28th, 2020, 6 p.m. We are in the Active Adult Center. All members of the committee are present, plus noted on my list. For topics of discussion, we have two pieces of current legislation that are pretty much one and one with each other. Ordinance number 110-2020, titled Foundation Grant Request Newton Park and Soccer Complex Project, and ordinance 111-2020, titled ODNR Grant Request Newton Park and Soccer Complex Project. These are both grants.
I'm sorry. We've had a couple people not using them lately.
Oh.
Gotta remind everybody. Sorry.
No problem. All right, these grant requests are for up to $500,000 because that's the maximum we can ask for. Do I have any discussion on these? Okay. Hearing none, because of the deadlines given for these grants to go in, does the committee mind motioning to suspend on the vote? Do I have any objection?
no,
Do I have any objection from the rest of the membership? Okay. I do have a request for legislation, a letter from Director McLean requesting legislation to apply to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Parks and Watercraft for up to $15,000 in grant funding to fund staff watercraft training and advertising. This grant would be a 20% match, and per the director, the wages of the seasonals that will be doing that will count as that 20%, so they will be working in lieu of actually paying money. The grant's every 2 years, and it is due in by November. Are there any questions on this piece of legislation?
Was it 20 or 25%?
20.
We apply for this every year, correct?
The director said it's every 2 years, yes. Any other questions?
I'll make a motion that we call for this.
Thank you. Second?
Second answer.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimous. Then for miscellaneous discussion, the Mum Gardens will remain intact through October 11th. Floral plaque and arch will remain up as long as they do look presentable. Is all I have there. Does anybody have any other discussion? Hearing none, can I have a motion to adjourn? Okay.
I just wanted to know how many mums they ended up selling. I know they sold them all.
We ordered a total of 3,200, and the Magic City Kiwanis bought the last 120 that were left, and they're gonna sell those at the farmer's market tomorrow. So after you take out the arch and circle, we sold about 29.
And what do they usually sell? I don't know.
In a normal year, I would bring in 6,800,
Okay,
so just about half.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Hyde.
Yes,
You
Ms.
said
Nicole.
the arch, and that's gonna be there till when, October?
The gardens will remain intact through the October 11th. The clock and arch will remain up as long as they still look good. If they start blowing away or dying off, it'll come down.
Thank you.
Anything else? Hearing none, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. And we are adjourned at 6:05.
Okay, next up is public welfare and safety. This is the bit.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to bring to order the Public Welfare and Safety Committee meeting. It's Monday, September 28th, 2020, here in the Active Adult Center at 6:07. All men to agreement with Zoll Medical Corporation. This is authorizing the city of Barberton to enter into contract with Zoll Medical Corporation in the amount of $56,880 for the purchase of 4 mechanical CPR units. And this, if passed, this will be purchased using the CARES Act money. Does anybody have any questions about this piece of legislation? The next piece of legislation is resolution number 109, 2020. And it is a commendation for firefighter Kevin King regarding his retirement from the Summit County Task Force.
No, it's from the FEMA, Ohio Task Force 1, Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation? Okay. Moving on, we have a couple of new requests for legislation. The first one is a letter from Chief Pursley requesting legislation to enter into contract with Vasu Communications, Inc. for the purchase of a new radio system. So the Barberton Fire Department received a grant from the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program for $196,672.96 for the purchase of a new radio system. The manufacturer chosen is on the state of Ohio procurement list, and the quote is below the state contract. Does anyone have any questions? Chief, do you have anything to add?
No, not really, unless somebody has any specific questions. Yes.
I just wanted to know, how long the radio system generally lasts.
So the last one that we had in place, we received a previous Assistance to Firefighters grant for, I believe that was 2011. So like your computers, any type of,
Technology?
yeah. So our current radios that we have now cannot be repaired anymore, and they're obsolete, so.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. This is for the chief. Excuse me. Sorry, slipped my mind. Oh, yes. Is this a 100% grant or 80/20?
No, it is it's actually a 90/10. FEMA pays 90% of the cost, the city has to pay the 10%.
Anyone else have any questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Greer. All in favor? Aye. The next piece of legislation is a letter from Chief Persley requesting legislation to appropriate $178,793.60 from the unappropriated item of the FEMA fund to the fire department capital budget of the FEMA fund. And this is for the purchase of the new radio system. And the chief adds that the remaining $17,879.36 is the 10% matching funds required, and it was already in the department's budget. Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation? Do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Mr. Greer,
I'll second.
second by Mr. Griffin. All in favor?
Aye.
The last request for legislation is a letter from Chief Persley requesting legislation to appropriate $12,000 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the fire department operating budget. The Barberton Fire Department has incurred several unbudgeted costly repairs to our fleet and stations. The department needs to purchase computers for our staff who are approved to work from home and replace the desktop computers surpassing their usability. Chief, do you have anything else to add?
No, not unless somebody has some specific questions.
Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. Chief, how many people work from home?
Right now, just myself and the administrative assistant, Marianne, so there's only two, so we'd be looking at 2 laptops for that purpose. The 2 other administrative positions that we have is the administrative lieutenant and the fire marshal. From talking with IT, their computers cannot be limped along anymore, so those would be the 4 computers.
I know it's the city's IT department.
Yes.
Does anyone else have any questions? Do I have a motion to call for this? Oh, I'm sorry. Do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Greer. All in favor?
Aye.
Miscellaneous discussion. Does anyone have anything for safety? Yes.
Thanks, Chair. This is for Chief. Are you the one writing the grants?
Some of them, yes.
Okay.
I wrote them for a number of years. I'm trying to utilize some of the other personnel to bring them up to speed. The radio grant was actually Chief Baldwin wrote that with Lieutenant Beckman prior to Chief Baldwin retiring, but
Awesome, thank you. Good job.
Anyone else have any questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Mr. Greer,
Second.
second by Mr. Griffin. We are adjourned at 6:16.
Okay, next up is rules, marketing, and development with Mr. Griffin.
Rules, Marketing, and Development. I would like to call this meeting to order. Today, September 28, 2020. We are meeting in the Active Adult Center. All members are present and those that are noted here on my sheet. Tonight, we have no requests for legislation. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion for rules?
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Heide?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to let you know that I'm still working on the process for the questionnaire and the timing. I've been working with Director Miller to make sure anything written doesn't run afoul of the charter. So next meeting, I should have that in place to submit for everybody to look at.
And that's for the,
For appointments. Right.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anything else for rules? If not, could I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Heide.
I'll second it, sir.
Okay. We adjourn at 6:16.
Okay, next up is city utilities, Mrs. Colbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, it's Monday, September 28th. This is city utilities. We're in the Active Adult Center. All members are present, along with others as noted. We have a request for legislation, a letter from Ms. Crawford requesting legislation to appropriate $60,000 from the unappropriated item of the Stormwater Miscellaneous Revenue Fund to the Stormwater Equipment and Furnishing. And this will be referred to finance. It was for the equipment, I believe, the water. There it is, it's right in front of me. Shouldn't say what it was for. The meters,
That's reimbursement for, the
rain
rain
gauges,
gauges
yeah, the
that
rain
they
gauges.
just purchased.
I think we discussed this a couple of times. Is there any other questions about this? Okay. Do we have a motion to call for this?
I'll make a motion.
I will second it.
We have a motion from Carol Fry and a second from Carla Devitt. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Mr. Weaver was on vacation, so we did not receive a letter from him, but we do have a letter from him requesting legislation to appropriate $24,416.12 from the unappropriated item of the sewer fund to the capital budget of the sewer fund. And this also will be referred to finance. And this is for,
Well, this is very similar to that first ordinance. You remember the Miami Avenue sewer project that took place last year. We received a grant for 60% of the cost of that repair. That is the money that we received from OPWC. So what I'm asking is, since I paid that money out of my capital fund that was planned for other items, to take that money and put back into the fund, so that I can move ahead with that.
Are there any questions about that? Do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make a motion.
We have a
I will second it.
motion from Carol Fry, seconded by Carla DeVevick. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Any other miscellaneous discussion for utilities? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Motion from Carla DeVevick,
I'll second it.
second from Carol Fry. We are adjourned at, okay,
Okay.
6:22.
Okay, next up is finance and personnel, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance and Personnel Committee is meeting on Monday, September 28th, 2020. The time is 6:24 p.m. We are at the Active Adult Center. All members of the committee are present, as well as all council people and guests as listed on my meeting sheet. The topics of discussion for this evening are that we have 6 pieces of legislation to vote on this evening. The first is ordinance number 112-2020, titled Enter into Agreement, City of Norton. And we are going to amend this particular piece of legislation to take out the emergency wording. This is for the agreement between Norton and Barberton for the building department and the permits and the split that we do with Norton. They get 10% of the permit fees for their city and we keep the 90%. Does anyone have any comments about this piece of legislation? Mrs. DeBeck.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Flaker, do you have a breakdown of what we spend just on Norton's portion of work in comparison to what we bring in? Do you have some sort of line accounting, paperwork that would indicate, exactly where we're at with that?
So are you asking like how much revenue and how much expenses we pay out to Norton?
Well, what I'm asking is, yes,
Mr. Hyde?
Thank you both. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mrs. Bevick, but I think she's asking for, do we know how much time is spent doing work for Norton, whether it be there or in the office, versus that kind of payroll versus what we're bringing in? Am I correct, Mrs. Bevick?
yes. So if you were gonna look at this as a separate entity, if you will, we're bringing in, say, 50,000 for the year in revenue for the costs, or for the fees that we've collected. What are we spending on labor, paper, anything that is used to complete the job for Norton, for their portion?
I would have to check with the building department to see, because when we get their time cards, it's not broken out on what their hours were worked on. It was just the hours that they worked in total. So I would have to get with the building department or Mr. Tracy and check with them and see what how much time do they spend on an electric license or a heating license or stuff like that. I would have to check with them and ask them to try to figure that out.
I guess I feel like that's an important piece of the puzzle because we don't exactly know where we stand, with that. And, you know, I've talked to several residents the last few days and basically they feel like it's a kickback and they've asked me those questions. And, I apologize that I didn't get that email to you, but I stayed over at work today, so I didn't have an opportunity. But I don't feel comfortable. I mean, I know we're removing the emergency wording. I also don't feel comfortable suspending the rules until we have that information. That's just my opinion.
Bill?
Councilwoman DeBevick, I did speak with Dave Sykes, who does not do all the inspections. It's typically the CBO. The time frame to do an inspection can vary depending on what it is. Framing is going to be more than something else. He said anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. But you also have to remember there's the permit fee that we collect and then also the inspection fee. So two different fees. But the time that they spend based on my conversation with Mr. Sykes is minimal.
I mean, I just think if you're talking about a business, and I know we're not, the city's not in the business, actually, we can't even profit off of this legally, I don't think. But I guess what I'm saying is when you factor in, yeah, when he's there, he might be there 20 minutes, but drive time, gas, any papers that I mean, there's costs associated with running a business. So I guess my question is, do we have a breakdown of what revenues versus what we're spending as far as labor and operating costs for just for Norton?
Can I ask a question of the mayor regarding the building department? I don't know how the permits work if the person requesting the permit does most of the paperwork and then just comes into the office and has them check it and then pays the fee? Or do our employees actually do the filling out of the paperwork?
No, I believe that the applicant fills out the paperwork, turns it in. It's granted or not with the permit. So it takes a few seconds to fill it out. They're given that paper, the information is input into the software system, the computer system. And then the applicant calls for and schedules a inspection. So I don't know how, you may not accurately be able to break that down. So if an inspector goes out and has 15 inspections, and it could be right on the border of Barberton and Norton. So they don't log, mileage from, hey, I'm at this house in Barberton and it's 3 blocks to get to Norton. They don't keep that track of mileage or things of that nature. So they typically go out and get a day's worth of inspections done at one swoop.
Does anyone else have any questions? Mr.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Fry. My question would be, other than gas, labor, you're still gonna have to pay those people, aren't you?
Yeah, but they're doing it.
I'm just saying,
They're
8
doing
hours.
work though in the city of Barberton versus, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor, but how many people are in the building department? 4?
6.
6? Okay, so do the inspectors also take care of property maintenance?
Yes.
So if they're inspecting, then they're not taking care of it's.
But there's only one inspector.
Yes.
And then, so the CBO does most of the inspections, where the CBO does not do property maintenance. So you're really not losing anything on
So
property
then
maintenance.
the inspector doesn't do property maintenance.
The inspector does, the CBO does not. We could have had this information for everybody available if we knew ahead of time.
Well, this was a late request with all due respect,
But
and
this was discussed last week also, so. there's a
I
number of
raised the
days.
same questions.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes, it's not, I mean, when you say there's time,
they're getting paid, if they're doing barge inspections for maintenance, so their time is there. It's not any overtime. They don't use that for overtime. And mileage, they get gas, you know, most of all of them use their own private cars. So the mileage would have nothing to do with it because they go down and get gas until their vehicle up. So
Gas costs
a breakdown of, they'd have to keep track of, you know, who's doing what. And, I don't understand what the concern is because if they're in there today, they might do 15 Norton and tomorrow do 30 Barberton. You know, so they're working. I don't know what the breakdown would be. I mean, what would be proof to that? Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, Chair. Is there a way going forward that, and I understand that an hour worked is an hour worked regardless of you're doing the work, that separately can be logged when time is being used in another city so that we could better understand how much time and expenditure we're paying our people, because ultimately we're paying them in another city. So if somebody spends 4 hours a day working in Norton and 4 hours a day working in Barberton, we're still paying them for 8 hours. Yes, I get that. But is it possible to log that this time I'm dedicating to things in Norton so that by year's end or by 6 months, we could have an accurate breakdown? I'm sorry, Director Miller wants to.
Well, certainly you know how many inspections you're doing, right? Because they're paying per inspection, right? Correct?
Right.
So are they broken down by type of inspection? So what are the types of inspection? Like, sure. So if you asked any inspector, if you had someone ask an inspector and bring it back to you, you would know the approximate amount of time that it would take. So a framing inspection would take this kind of an amount of time. I don't know, what do you call it? I don't know what they're inspecting. And that would give you some sort of idea. So if they did 30 of the framing inspections a year and 10 of these type of inspections a year and 40 of these type, you could get some sort of idea over a year because they've had this contract for several years. You would have some type of an idea over time how much time they were devoting. This should be a very simple question to be able to answer. And so that information should be able to come back to you.
Thank you. Mr. Greer?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention that I think Councilwoman DeBevick's concern is legit. Work done there is work that can't be done here, right? So it is, whether or not they have work here, it's taking them away from Barberton. So I see that point. To Councilman Heidick's point, I would like to see maybe breakdown, and it could be just as simple as just having the numbers available for how many permits and what type of permits are done. And it's not, it's not about the hour worked or what we're paying them. It's about the hour lost that they're not working in Barberton. A potential house that they could have been inspecting, or a citation they could be giving, or something to better our city, they're somewhere else. So I see across all points. I just wanted to point that out, that that's a valid concern.
Mr. Hager?
Has anybody spoken with Summit County to see if Norton went to Summit County, how much they would get instead of 10%?
If Norton went to Summit County, would Summit County pay them 10%? Is that what you're
Yes,
asking?
have you spoken to
I have
anybody?
no idea. Do you know, Bill?
No, that would all be up to negotiations between the county and whatever community. And like I said last week, or the week before, in my experience, when this county took over City of Akron and City of Cuyahoga Falls, it was 10%.
Another question. If we would get rid of the building department, the finance department right now, we pay rent, correct? For that building where we're renting? If we get rid of the building department, we can move the finance department into the building department where we don't pay rent. And this way we save money also from there. We get rid of I think 46 employees, we keep one inspector, is that correct?
No. No, you keep all employees.
I'm sorry?
You'd have to keep all employees.
We have to keep all the
You'd
employees?
want
You
one
don't
property
wanna
maintenance
lay off
inspector for the
people.
whole city.
You don't want to lay off people, do you?
If they're going to Summit County, why do we need them?
Because
So
they do
you want to
property
lay off
maintenance
employees?
more than they do housing inspection. The inspections are basically for the most part, they're done by the CBO, who does not do property maintenance inspections. So if you do away with the building department, which generates a fixed amount of money, the property maintenance does not generate necessarily any money. If someone goes out and sites properties for 8 hours, that's a cost. There's no generation of revenue necessarily. And if there is, it could be down the road. So if they cite 100 people in one day or 1 week, all those people could comply, and we've paid the expense of the labor, the gas, the paper, all that stuff, with no revenue. If I redo a house, I gotta pay the permit, that's fixed guaranteed money, I gotta do the inspection, fixed guaranteed money. So as I mentioned earlier, talking to Mr. Sykes, 10 to 20 minutes. So it could be the depth of holes dug for a fence. That could take, depending on the size of the yard, it could take just a few minutes. Framing of a house may take a little longer depending on the size of the house. Electrical, depending on what it is, could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So he said basically 10 to 20 minutes.
And ultimately, we are making 90%. We're giving away 10%, and we wouldn't make the 90% if we did not sell the permits. And something else to keep in mind is that Norton is growing. Brookside is going to turn that property into a housing development, which would bring us all those permits. And Norton is also building in other areas. And I just think that it's in our interest to do this. And if things have to change down the line, they can, but this agreement is in effect until somebody wants to amend it in some way. And Mayor, could you answer this? If it gets to the point where with all these permits, if they do the new housing development, we could probably bring on another person in the building department, right? If the revenue is there.
Possibly. We're seeing an uptick because we have the housing development happening in Marvin right now. They don't get a piece of that. If you've been out to Eastern Road, you see that Clinton Aluminum has built their 200,000, 240,000 square feet facility. We did the plan reviews, we did the inspections, permitting and inspections. They get 10%, but that'll go to the county or private industry or private company.
You had a question.
Thank you. Just more of a statement in an email exchange back and forth with the mayor there. This is just my opinion on this one. If we were to say to try to abandon the building department to that argument there, the cost savings versus services lost don't add up to me in the exchange I had with the mayor.
I saw your exchange. Are you saying that after your exchange, you're of the opinion that we would lose more to do away with this agreement?
To get rid of our building department altogether, that was my question to the mayor, because in the time when every dollar counts, our exchanges back and forth were strictly about dollar for dollar without taking services into consideration, and the savings of moving to the county versus keeping our own didn't equate to me of the services we would lose and the immediacies we would lose. When it comes to something like Norton, I would like to see more reach. And I don't know if that's something the administration can negotiate with different things and bringing more people on to do different things, but I would like to see the building department somehow service more in Norton if that's possible. But again, that would be negotiations there and not.
And we would need more people to do that.
Correct.
Right.
But then.
And another point I'd like to make is you have been bringing up that you would like to merge with Norton.
Yes.
Yes. And that's been discussed for a million years. But at any rate, if you are going to want to increase our reach and possibly merge, you have to be doing some kind of business with them. I think it's kind of underhanded to just say, we don't want to do business with you anymore, go to the county. And I think that would burn some bridges. as far as going forward with being able to do more with Norton. Mrs. Reddick?
I concur, with Mr. Heidig, but I just wanna add that I'm not proposing that we just cut ties with Norton. I'm asking for simple figures to see if it's worth it. And I'm wondering how it is that Barberton gives a 10% kickback somewhere. I mean, it essentially it's a kickback. We're providing a service. You said we get 90%, they get 10%. No, because we have costs associated with that 90%. So what percent are we getting? We don't have numbers to tell us what percent we're getting. I am all about keeping the building department. This discussion for me is not about getting rid of the building department. We absolutely need that. This discussion for me is 10% with no figures, and we're taking people out of our city. And what's it costing us? What is it worth? At the end of all of it, what is it worth?
I'm sorry, who? Mr. Flaker?
I just wanted to bring up to council today, Mr. Jaber reached out to me. He was asking me what the profits and losses were for the building department for the past 3 to 5 years. So I ran those numbers and I went back to 2005. 2005 would have been the first year, or 2015 would have been the first year we entered into contract with Norton, entered into this agreement. We were in the agreement for about half a year. That year, building department lost $70,000. The following year, full year of this agreement with Norton, the city of Barberton made $40,000 off the building department. The following year after that is about $15,000. Last year was about $90,000. So far this year, profit-wise, I wouldn't say profit, but the revenue exceeds the expenses so far by $40,000. This is all during having a full agreement with Norton. So last week it was brought up the losses. You got to cut ties where we're losing money, but right there, there's a spreadsheet showing that while yes, we're paying for time for the individuals in Norton doing the inspections and that, but it was brought up last week that there's a concern that the building department is losing the city money. But right there is a spreadsheet showing that it is making the city money. Without that agreement, you're looking at roughly $50,000 of revenue lost for the city. So you take away that $50,000, you're talking about a loss in 2015, maybe a break even in 2016, a loss in 2017, a loss in 2018. We would have ended up ahead in 2019, and so far this year, the trend continues at about $50,000. The building department will be at another loss again this year if things continue as they are. So I just wanted to bring that up to council. That way you guys can use that information to weigh in your decision for the city. So.
All right. Does anybody else have any more questions for Mr. Flaker because he has the figures?
I just have one question. Mr. Flaker, in those revenues so I know that we use some of our rental registration, if I believe.
Those figures I just gave to you guys was just purely general
Okay,
fund.
that's what I was wondering, because I didn't see the email, so
Yeah,
thank you for
yeah,
that.
it's purely general fund with those figures I just brought up to you guys.
So that wasn't adding in what we take from the rental registration?
No, because the big question always is how's the general fund doing? So I just focused on the general fund and what the building department is costing the general fund itself.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that we transferred money from the rental registration program to the building department, or, no?
No, we do wage splits, which we pay a portion of the wages out of the rental registration
Okay,
fund.
that's what,
However,
thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Are you comfortable with voting on this tonight?
I am.
Councilwoman Frye,
Yes.
we can get, I'll talk to Roger and the building department and Jeremy, get those figures to everyone. It's minimal, the breakdown of time as best as we can. As the law director said, when we put this together, how accurate is it gonna be? Depends, every inspection is gonna be a little different, but, yeah, we can get that for you moving forward. Trying to track this, it's gonna be a little more work, but I don't see that too far of a reach for us to try to put together. But I would ask that this gets voted on today so we can continue to move forward.
If you're comfortable with it. Do I have a motion, to amend the, ordinance, the emergency wording that is on the ordinance? Do I have a motion for that?
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Mr. Medges. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mrs. Angela. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 No.
All right, the second piece of legislation that's on the agenda for this evening is resolution number 113, 2020. This is the Barberton Public Library levy support. Any questions about the levy support? No? Okay, the third piece of legislation on the agenda for this evening is resolution number 114, 2020, certifying property tax rates. Any questions about that piece of legislation? No? Okay, the fourth piece of legislation for this evening is resolution number 115, 2020, title Advance of Local Taxes. Any questions about that piece of legislation? Okay. The fifth piece of legislation is ordinance number 116, 2020. The title is Appropriation CARES Act Funding. Do we have any questions about that piece of legislation? The sixth piece of legislation is ordinance number 117, 2020, titled Appropriation CARES Act Funding. Any questions about that piece of legislation? No? Okay. Now I'll open up for miscellaneous discussion. Does anybody have any miscellaneous discussion for finance?
Mrs. Flaker, did you happen to get a response from Summit County?
Yes, and one of the pieces of legislation that I sent over to Renee to give the council, which will be coming, we finally got the contract completely signed with Summit County. That will be $742,000 in that payroll support program, roughly $742,000. So that contract's all signed. We should be seeing the money come into the city in the next week or so. So I'm working on trying to get all the reports together for that so we can make sure those funds are claimed and so we don't have to give back any money to the county with their payroll support program.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay, motion made by Mrs. Devevic and seconded by Mrs. Angela. And we are adjourned at 6:50 p.m.
Okay, that concludes our committee meetings. We'll start with our legislative meeting in 5 minutes.
Did you email me like 3 o'clock? I didn't get you about 4:20.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna ask.
Yeah.
Are you saying it? I want you to say it. All right.
Do you have something like that? Okay.
I was great. Thank you, appreciate it.
I come down, I take about, I don't take a lunch.
That's the one that I showed you before for the service.
He's like,
Utilities service, the discount program we just passed.
so thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad.
If you have a look at that.
I'm planning to bring that.
On the form.
When did you send the?
I forgot to send you an email about it. I know last time we talked, I showed you that form. I started looking into it a little bit more, and the ordinance when it was passed, when it first came, it took into account homestead grandfathering for that time prior to that. And it's using, I think it's using that form, is using the numbers from.
Oh, you're talking about this one.
So we know, yeah, the discount program, so we technically by ordinance, don't use those two numbers. 30,000 flat, or somebody that was eligible for homestead.
Yeah, with the new ordinance.
Yeah, right, so on the form, it's not one, and it's 41, and it's 65 company numbers.
Yeah, they would need to change.
Yeah.
We would need to change.
Okay, I use them a lot, so that's why I was gonna go out, tell the ladies.
I'll have, yeah, I'll call on. Give about a month. And, wouldn't have been a bad idea.
I know, and that's what I was thinking about when we were doing it. I started thinking, because I used to all the time, I was like, well, maybe we could just rewrite it again to say it goes with, I don't know, but it,
Yeah, we do that, just updates it.
yeah, just update so we don't have to.
You don't
But I don't think that it's not an active one, so.
Oh, no.
Prior to that ordinance originally.
Right, yeah, the county does a lot of homesteads.
So, yeah.
We don't have
One of those things you say that we could tie it to.
Like, okay, you know, that's right.
Let them do all of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And just have it,
Exactly.
if you qualify for this, you qualify for.
There you go. You qualify for the heating assistance
And
program.
is that, for, same requirements, 65?
Yeah, it's got all, yeah, you just keep the age stuff all the same, but you use that heating number. You just update it.
Maybe we can get that, just so we know. Because it'll,
Yeah, you could bring that up on your computer and look at those. It's not a bad one.
yeah, because I do know that we'll be back in a couple
Yeah,
years.
every year we have to do that,
Yeah.
when you think, you know, and so, I mean, for the government.
As long as it's there.
Yeah.
We
As long as they do it, they-
gotta amend it, any type of it says we're resurfacing, the road program, so we have to recall that. I didn't see it until that ordinance came up. It's confusing because the form I used was numbers that didn't match the current homestead.
Yeah, those are the old numbers.
The old numbers.
Yeah.
Which was fine, because there's still people alive that qualify.
Yeah.
But I don't
And,
know that.
and what I have, what I need to do, and I guess I want to wait till the COVID thing is done, is a lot of focus. We need to send out to everybody who's on the program and have them research, you know, I mean, it's possible some people are dead. Right, exactly. And so it's time to.
That'd be awesome. Okay, I just wanted to bring it to your attention that that form was off.
Oh, yeah, I know it is. Yeah, we have to change it. They are aware of any application.
I did, yeah.
I know that.
Okay, Owen, I just,
Oh,
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah, that's
Right. Well, I had that.
Sorry. How long is
Till 11. I know. Well, I appreciate that it's done before we get on the floor now.
You ever seen some of our guys?
Planning is just, yeah, but what gives us time is when it's nothing from that.
Oh, yeah, no, I know.
Then 6 months more on the position. They don't finish CIC. Yeah, that you just have to do it when you take it out. This is, hold on. For 6 months. I don't know, so.
Yeah. Well, great, thanks for Stacy and I, you guys.
Okay, let's get started.
Just email me that, David.
This is a regular legislative meeting of the Barberton City Council. Today is Monday, September 28, 2020. It is 7 p.m. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance, followed by invocation by myself. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity of bringing us together to face the issues and concerns of our city. Grant us the guidance to unite and share the wisdom we need to become the best community we can be. Please safeguard our brave men and women who protect us at home and abroad. We ask that you work through us and strengthen our hearts and minds in making positive decisions as they come before us. Amen. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mrs. Angela,
Here.
Mrs. Coburn,
Here.
Mrs. Devitt,
Here.
Mrs. Frye,
Here.
Mr. Greer.
Here.
Mr. Griffin,
Here.
Mr. Heidi,
Here.
Mr. Shaver.
Here.
Okay, because we're starting early, Council Rule 103 states that the regular and committee of the whole meetings shall be at 7:30 PM. Since we are starting earlier than this, we need to invoke Council Rule 702. Mrs. DeBeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103.
Thank you, and Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second the motion to suspend 702. Invoke 702 to suspend 103.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Hyde to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approval of the regular legislative meeting. Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, September 14th, 2020, as presented.
Thank you, and Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Hyde to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, September 14th, 2020, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. Petitions and claims.
There are none.
Matters requested.
They've been passed out.
Citizens addressing council.
I have none.
Okay. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 106, 2020, presented by Mrs. Angela, titled amending Harvey Codified Ordinances, Chapter 1456, Vacant Property Registration Program. An ordinance amending section 1456.04, owner required to act enforcement authority by adding tiered registration fees for commercial and industrial vacant properties and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Colbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff, second by Mrs. Colburn to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Shaver,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 106-2020 be adopted as presented.
Thank you, Mrs. Colburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angela, second by Mrs. Colburn to adopt ordinance number 106, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Shaver,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Ordinance number 107, 2020, presented by Mrs. Angela, titled zoning map amendment, 800 Worcester Road North. An ordinance authorizing the rezoning of parcels 01-13729, 01-13727, 01-00555, and 01-01927, also known as 800 Worcester Road North, from RS40 Residential Single Family to C3 Community Center Commercial.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angela.
I move that the rule as required by section 5.01 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Colburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angela, second by Mrs. Colburn to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coder,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 107-2020 be adopted as presented.
Thank you, and Mrs. Culver.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angela, second by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 107, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Coder,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Ordinance number 108, 2020, presented by Mrs. Devitt, titled Enter into Contract with Zoll Medical Corporation. An ordinance authorizing the city of Marvinton to enter into contract with Zoll Medical Corporation in the amount of $56,880 for the purchase of 4 mechanical CPR units and declared an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Bevick's motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick, second by Mr. Greer to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Coder,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 108, 2020.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Bevick's motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to adopt ordinance number 108, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Coder,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Resolution number 109, 2020, presented by all of council, sponsored by Mrs. Devitt, titled Commendation Firefighter Kevin King. A resolution of the council of the city of Marvinton honoring and giving public recognition to firefighter Kevin King for 20 years of dedicated service to the Ohio Task Force 1.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Bevick's motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick, second by Mr. Greer to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coder.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 109, 2020.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Bevick's motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Greer to adopt resolution number 109, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coder,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Ordinance number 110, 2020, presented by Mr. Heidi, titled Foundation Grant Request, New Park and Soccer Complex Project. An ordinance approving the submission of a grant application to the Barberton Community Foundation for the new park and soccer complex project, an amount up to $500,000 and declared an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the Hyde's motion.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidi, second by Mr. Jaber to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Mr. Heide?
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance and the next one, due to the time constraints of the grant application, I see a suspension warranted.
Anyone else? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Heide?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Motion to adopt. Mr. Heide?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 110-2020 be adopted.
And Mr. Jaber?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Mr. Heidi's adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heide, second by Mr. Jaber, to adopt ordinance number 110-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Heide?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Ordinance number 111-2020, presented by Mr. Heide, titled ODNR Grant Request, Newton Park and Soccer Complex Project. An ordinance approving the submission of a grant application to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, ODNR, for the Newton Park and Soccer Complex Project in an amount up to $500,000 and declared an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Heide.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mr. Jaber?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Mr. Heidi's.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heide, second by Mr. Jaber, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heide?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heide.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 111-2020 be adopted.
And Mr. Jaber?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Mr. Heidi's adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heide and second by Mr. Jaber to adopt ordinance number 111-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heide?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
The following ordinance was amended in the Finance Committee this evening to take out the emergency wording to read like this. Ordinance number 112-2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, titled Enter into Contract, Enter into Agreement, City of Norton. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to extend the current agreement with the City of Norton that will allow the City of Barberton Building Department to assume authority for all building code administrative functions within Norton limits.
Okay.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. DeBeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish not to second this motion, so I can go to the next.
Mrs. Angela.
I will second the motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. Angela, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Heide?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBeck?
No.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
No.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
It passes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 112-2020 as amended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to pass.
Okay. Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second the motion to adopt.
Okay. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. Angela, to adopt ordinance 112-2020 as amended. Are there any remarks? Mrs. DeBeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I chose to vote no this evening for suspension, and ultimately that's going to result in my no vote for the ordinance. I don't think that we should have pushed this through with suspension without the proper numbers, and so that is why I decided against not calling for suspension of the rules.
Okay. Are there any other remarks? Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be voting to authorize this, but I do want to say that moving forward, especially with the development Norton is doing and the constant expansion of them, I would like to see more reach and more numbers coming in front of us in the future.
Thank you. Any other remarks? Mr. Jaber?
I'll also be voting no too, and I'm following Mrs. Reddick's views on this, to get more information and more numbers. And I also honestly believe if we offered Norton less percentage, they would accept it, being so close and being neighbors, and then one be so close to Norton themselves and having Barbara next to them as a neighbor. I believe we would offer them 5%, they would probably have taken it. And that I'd be voting no. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes?
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
No.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
No?
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
6-2 passed. Resolution number 113, 2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, titled Marvin Public Libraries Levy Support. A resolution endorsing Marvin Public Libraries renewal levy and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeVette, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to vote no for suspension, and ultimately, if the suspension passes, vote no on the resolution. I don't believe that a legislative body should be endorsing any levies that don't pertain to the city itself. I understand the value of the levy that the Barberton Public Library does for the city. I understand all that, but I do not think that it's the legislative's job to endorse other entities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption. Suspension, excuse me.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes?
Mr. Hyde,
No.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes?
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
7-1 passed.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that resolution number 113, 2020 be adopted.
Thank you. Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeVette, to adopt resolution number 113, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes?
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
No.
Mrs. Devitt.
Yes.
7-1 passed. Resolution number 114, 2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, titled Certifying Property Tax Rates. A resolution accepting the amounts and rates of property tax as determined by the Budget Commission of Summit County and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the Summit County Auditor for the year 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Chamber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 114-2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to adopt resolution number 114-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Chamber,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Resolution number 115-2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, titled Advance of Local Taxes. A resolution of the Council of the City of Barberton authorizing the advance of local taxes by the County Fiscal Office for the 2020 tax year payable in 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Chamber,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 115-2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to adopt resolution number 115-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Chamber,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Ordinance number 116-2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, titled Appropriation CARES Act Funding. An ordinance appropriating $428,836.57 from the unappropriated item of the local coronavirus relief fund to the personnel service budget of the local coronavirus relief fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Chamber,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 116-2020 be adopted.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to adopt ordinance number 116-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Chamber,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Ordinance number 117-2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, titled Appropriation CARES Act Funding. An ordinance appropriating $70,266 from the unappropriated item of the local coronavirus capital budget of the local coronavirus relief fund and declare an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mr. Bevin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. Bevin, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mr. Gager,
Yes.
Mrs. Bevin,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Miller.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 117, 2020.
And Mrs. Bevin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. Bevin, to adopt ordinance number 117, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coker,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Bevin,
Yes.
Mr. Gager,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
And the first readings.
Second readings of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Third readings of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Appointments,
I do not have any.
miscellaneous and unfinished business.
I have one thing.
Okay,
I received a request from the Department of Liquor Control a couple weeks back regarding the renewal of all the liquor permits in the city of Marvin. I gave a copy to Chief Warburg, Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Doherty, and all the council, and I did not receive any objections.
anything else?
That's it for me.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just remind everybody, all council members and city officials and the mayor, they're all invited this Wednesday, September 30th, from 5 to 7, to meet with Bob Jeanette. He's running for Summit County Council. We'd nice to see you guys here today, Wednesday. And also, I have a virtual tour of the Amazon building. Unbelievable. I mean, it's amazing with all robots and technology, and it's just amazing. If anyone see it personally, they have the pictures. Can't share them, but I can show it off my phone. And they're hiring. My friend from the West Coast came by and he's doing some work up here, and they are hiring for 1,500. Early in the year, we said between 2,500 and 3,000. The number is 1,500. So if anyone see any pictures, let me know. It is amazing. I mean, technology is very, very cool. So with that, I pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the chair of streets, I just want to give everybody, if you have Nick's or you knew, Fish Street's going to be closed for an additional week until the 2nd, which is this Friday, for more work. It was only supposed to be closed 1 week, but they did extend that. Secondly, I am hosting a 2020 Halloween home decoration contest. So anybody, any residents that live in the city of Barberton that want to enter, you can just have them send me an email, and that's how they could enter. So.
Anybody else? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to thank council members who voted to pass ordinance 112, 2020, giving 10% back to the city of Barberton voting permits. Now, this has been on the books for 5 years, and some members of council who are all here today, Councilwoman McNally included, voted for that. No questions over the last 5 years. Now, the questions that came up tonight are legitimate questions. How much time is spent over there? What's the difference in time spent over there versus whatever? We don't track that accurately as somebody wants, but we can get those figures for you and start looking at that moving forward. The basis is, would you pay $6,000 on annually on average to maybe $58,000? And this also strengthens our partnership with the city. We joined dispatch 20 years ago. That's been working out great. Actually, we won a tax hero award for the state. We also had Springfield Township earlier this year. So we've got a great relationship. Things are working great. There's a lot of development happening here in Garland and New York, and we've got to continue this partnership. Talking about Halloween, some best practices came out today from Summit County Health Department. I'll go through a few of these, but I can forward them on. We talked about some of the normal things: sanitize your hands frequently, stay home if you're sick, avoid activities such as buying for apples, things of that nature. Select events and attractions that are held outdoors. Allow attendees to stay in their cars or socially distance. So just really adhering to the mandates that are out there already. Consider placing sweets on porch steps, on the table, or mentioning in the news where the gentleman had a tube. Yeah. So slip that in there. And again, I know this is impossible, but they say that having kids refrain from eating candy for 24 hours. So otherwise it's on the wrapper that they got. So those are some best practices put out today by the Summit County Health Department. Also, very important that everyone gets their family, their friends, their neighbors, their loved ones to take the U.S. Census, fill that out. This is continuing. It's very, very important that we get our numbers up. Last time I checked, we were talking 77% citywide. Certain parts of the city were less than what it was in 2010. This gives us a voice in DC, Congress. This gives us possibly more grant money. So a lot of the federal funding, CPG, those types of things are based on the census accuracy. So very important. If you have anyone that needs the link or needs information, please contact my office and we can get that to you. The Mom Festival was past weekend, Mom Sales, excuse me. What a great showing. Also a modification of our community. I want to thank everyone in the Parks Department, Lisa, and all those who volunteered. I thought that the setup was very nice. It worked pretty well from what I saw. I didn't hear any complaints. The weather was great. So good hats off to you, the crew, Lisa, and all the volunteers. I kind of want to bring up an issue over the weekend. There's some food trucks down on West Tusk. Councilman Jager posted on his social media about there's other posts about favoritism from the city for business, or this business, or that business. The city needs to embrace all the businesses downtown. Nothing's going to change, I'm quoting here. Nothing's going to change till they hear our voices. It's time to stand up and for more businesses. I don't know what businesses that entails. Let me just tell you how that all unfolded. I received a request from the Emergency Association to close West Tusk Avenue from 3rd Street to 6th Street. Look at it, we've done it before, we approved it. Some of the merchants did not want to participate. They talked to the Merchants Association, the request was redone, and they had asked for West Tusk to be shut down from 4th Street to 6th Street. So we did that. We received another request from Ignite asking for the closure, which had already been approved. We received no other requests for roads to be closed. We received no complaints from anyone. So in the past, I know there was a business just west of 6th Street, the Corner Cafe. They've had food trucks in the past without contacting the city, which is fine. But I had not heard from that owner. So I did reach out to the owner and we'll be talking to him very soon. Communication is key. We can't have one-sided posts on social media without getting the full facts. So you don't favor one business over another or one block over another. And we did this in the summertime, working with Mr. Heidi, Councilman Heidi. We set things up. He contacted me, I think that same night or the next day and said, hey, it's not working for us. We'd rather have parking. Can we remove this? And at that time, that was the only restaurant on 2nd Street that wanted to participate. So we take all this information, we make decisions based on the requests and the complaints. And in this case, this past weekend, we received one request, two, including the dining and merchants. No complaints, no other requests. When I talked to business owners in the past, told them, just call them. Send me an email, we'll review it, and move forward. The interesting piece of this is that it's my understanding that Ignite brewery offered to distribute the restaurant's menus among their tables. So if you went to the night, you didn't have the food trucks, and you wanted to order off this menu from the restaurant down the street, it was available. And then Ignite, it's my understanding, also had runners that would go down there to that restaurant, pick up the food, bring it back. But the restaurant's all fine. It's my understanding. So I think everyone's trying to work together. Communication can always be improved, and we strive to make sure that everyone is working in the same motion. But it's important that we have all the signs to the social media post that goes out, especially as elected officials. You've got to get the whole signs because whether you're, the job is to promote the city. Communication is key. So moving on from there, information on the city's property tax levy. So it's issue 9. We want to convey clearly and precisely all the educational material on how to read the tax bill. What does this mean for you? So people may not care what it means for their neighbor or whoever, but they care how it affects them. So we're going to get this information out very, very soon. All the information needs to be distributed so voters can make the most educated decision moving forward. But I've been asked, and some council members have asked, what if this measure passes? What if this measure doesn't pass? So just remember that this will replace some of the income lost without passing over. So without passing over, approximately $1.3 million, and this will bring in just over $1 million. So this is greatly needed. So what happens if it doesn't pass? So we're still waiting to collect all the data. Jeremy and I, Mr. Whitaker and I have been saying this for months now about how we're waiting for the most accurate data we can. But it's getting crunched. We don't have the most accurate data on our tax report. So if this doesn't pass for approval, what will be reduced or eliminated or changed? So I would definitely work with council, but we continue to receive more data and get that information out to you. We constantly, every year, we look at our fees that we charge and see, can we justify an increase? Is an increase needed? So we will do that no matter what. We'll look at that. And possibly make some recommendations. We'll look at some of the services that we provide. Is there a fee that legally we can charge for that service? We typically bring up the city of Akron. They assess for almost everything. Now I realize that it's crunch time. We're still working on those things. I saw Mr. Hyde trade some emails earlier today. I will be getting things out to you as soon as possible. And as always, my door is always open. It's imperative that if you have questions, you contact me, so that you guys can make the best decisions as well with legislation and where we're at. So, I did receive a few calls last week. We talked about vacant properties. I got 2 calls so far. I talked to the residents. We totally understand what we're doing, kind of taking a step back and looking at things. They're making, I told them to make a request for the land that they want. We will hold on to that. We're going to move forward with this in pretty swift motions. We're not going to hold on and take a step back for months and months and months. But we're going to take a step back and work with this, put a plan together so we can move swiftly in the future. So, but if you have any other residents who have questions, please have them contact me and I'll pass it along. So, Mr. President, that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. DeBetta.
Mr. President, may I ask a question? Am I allowed to ask a question?
Sure.
Even though it's not communication time in response to Mayor, I just want to ask, Mayor, when can we expect a list of properties that might be for sale and who's working on that?
Well, I passed, that wasn't requested before. What was requested previously was what properties were sold or donated. So you can start working on that. I don't have a timetable for you. We're very busy. There's a lot of things going on. For example, CDBG budget was passed, but now Melissa's kind of in her next busy phase of actually working with the feds to administer all of that. So
I was just curious because some residents have asked me, and I believe further email exchange, in that same email exchange, just requested if we could get that list, and you said, I didn't recall receiving it, I just wondered when we could expect it. And secondly, when did our current contract with Norton expire? When was it due to expire? I know it hasn't expired because we just passed it, but
It does not expire. The contract itself does not expire. The portion of the contract that begins at 10%, we don't get.
okay.
So that's that one.
Okay, so it was gone, it was gone.
Yeah, the reason that we didn't come sooner to council was we weren't sure if it had to go to council. So we found it out, and then we got it to council's hands as soon as possible.
Okay, so we weren't working with the contract with that, so far.
The contract for services is still applied. It's that one section that wasn't, so we'll have to go back and look, I don't know the exact date.
I was just curious because, you know, okay, that's what I was asking. I was just wondering because, you know, I feel like, you know, I feel as if you sort of picked on some of us about it. And honestly, was just curious why it would be an emergency, why you couldn't come back. That doesn't mean that my vote for sure would have been no. I just asked for some specific numbers. And, you know, but that explains it. I mean, I think that's part of the puzzle that needs explained is that we were working without that portion passed.
I'll say you feel you're picked on, and other people.
I'm
were
not
picked
saying
on.
that, I just was saying, I feel like that was an important portion for us to understand. And I didn't think about that question until after the fact.
Yeah, it wasn't asked previously. So, that's why I say, you know, it's important to contact me with any questions. We'll get to those answers. And like I said, in previous meetings, it's best to ask before the night, because I don't bring everything with me, because I can't anticipate what question is going to be asked. So, kind of asking the night of or afterwards, it takes some time to get that information, because we are so busy downtown, it's up to working and moving forward. So,
With all due respect, my brain works, it develops questions as we have a discussion. So to ask me to email the questions that I asked maybe tonight on Wednesday, I didn't have those questions on Wednesday. So you have to appreciate that.
well, that's not my background, but you know, this was the council's hand for at least a week, and a half. And I had questions pop up, I was in the seat, questions happened.
That's all.
Okay,
Thank you.
do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. DeVille?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
And Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, Mr. President. May I say just one quick thing before I second that? Just because we're gonna meet next week, if you know anybody that needs to, the registration deadline for voting in November is next Monday, October 5th. So if you know anybody that needs to register, get them in this week. With that, I'll second the motion to adjourn.
Okay, it was moved by Mr. DeVille and seconded by Mr. Hyde that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 7:45.
Anybody got a vote? I said, anybody got a vote? Vote, a roll vote. I need a roll vote. I need a vote. Yes, I'm all there. Okay, I'll vote.